Hello friends. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I never imagined my life would revolve around driving a truck at 34. Back in 2018, after my marriage ended and the papers were signed, I found myself stuck in the same town, going through the motions, working temp jobs, sending resumes, and trying not to sink into monotony. 6 months after the divorce, Cascade Freight Lines hired me as a long-haul driver. Wasn't glamorous, but it kept me moving, kept my mind off the emptiness, and gave me a sense of purpose. Most days blurred into one long stretch of asphalt, neon-lit truck stops, and greasy diners. But one trip changed everything. One night on the Cedar Ridge Highway, the kind of night that reshapes the way you see rest stops, road signs, and dark, empty parking lots forever. It was a Tuesday in early December 2021. I had been hauling refrigerated produce from Spokane down to Boise. The route was familiar. I had made it dozens of times before. But an accident near Millstone Pass had snaked traffic into a 2-hour nightmare, throwing off my schedule. By the time I cleared it, my eyes were burning, and my back ached from sitting in the same rigid position for hours. I should have pulled over earlier, but pride and stubbornness kept me going. The sun had long disappeared behind the Cascades, leaving only the pale light of a crescent moon and a blanket of stars. The temperature dropped into the low teens. My cab felt like a metal tin, even with the heater running full blast. Fuel was just above a quarter tank, enough to reach the next town, but my bladder had other plans. Then I saw it through the darkness, a hand-painted wooden sign illuminated by strings of dim yellow bulbs. Rest area, 2 miles. Hot meals, open late. My heart sank in relief. A real bathroom, hot food, and a chance to stretch my legs. I flipped my turn signal and took the narrow exit. The turnoff curved sharply into dense forest, headlights slicing through towering pines. The asphalt was cracked, the edges crumbling into gravel. My rig bounced and rattled with every dip and rut. I wondered why the state would allow a rest stop to fall into such disrepair. Maybe it was one of those unofficial stops, known to locals but absent from GPS. I had seen a few over the years, usually charming in their own offbeat way. The road twisted for about half a mile before opening into a clearing. I expected something modest, maybe a small pullout with a couple of picnic tables. But this was different. The clearing stretched at least the size of a football field, encircled by thick pines. No lights except a single buzzing fluorescent fixture on a tall wooden pole in the center, casting a sickly yellow glow. 3 trucks were parked in a loose cluster at the far end. No idling engines, no illuminated cabs, nothing. Truckers usually ran engines at night for heat, especially in temperatures this cold. Something felt off immediately. To the left, a small wooden building sat slightly askew, its paint peeling, windows fogged from condensation. A faded sign read, "Restrooms and Food," hand-painted in the same naive style as the highway sign. A dim orange glow flickered inside, like kerosene lamps. I parked my rig about 50 feet from the building, leaving distance between me and the other trucks. Habit, I guess. Air brakes engaged, engine off, and the cold seeped instantly through the seals. I sat, watching. No one moved in the building. The other trucks remained silent. Phone showed no signal, no surprise in the deep mountains. Clock read 11:18 p.m. I grabbed my heavy mag flashlight, the kind that doubles as a weapon if needed, and stepped into the biting cold. Gravel crunched under my boots. Patches of frozen snow scattered across the clearing. The fluorescent light buzzed louder as I approached, flickering intermittently. There was a smell, something hearty cooking, maybe stew or onions, comforting, almost human. The door was solid, wood thick and ice cold under my fingers. Inside, one room, roughly 20 by 15 feet, with a counter along the back and 4 mismatched tables. An older woman, maybe 62 or 63, stood behind the counter. Gray hair pulled into a loose bun, a floral apron over a thick sweater, stirring a large pot on a camping stove. She looked up when I entered. "Evening, dear," her voice hoarse, rasped by years of smoking. "Cold night. Hungry?" I nodded, approaching the counter. I noticed the restroom door had a padlock. "Out of order?" I asked. She gave a tight smile. "Pipes froze last week. Outhouse behind the building if you need it." It didn't make sense. She was cooking with water. But I ignored it. Tired, hungry, and desperate for warmth, I asked what was on the menu. Beef stew, fresh that afternoon. $9 for a bowl with bread. I handed over cash, and she made change from a small cigar box under the counter. Her movements were fast, almost mechanical, eyes flicking toward the window behind me. Then I heard it. Metal scraping against gravel outside. Sharp, deliberate. My stomach turned. She glanced at the window, just a flicker, then back to her pot. I froze, scanning the window. 2 men in dark jackets and baseball caps moved near my truck. One circled the cab, shining a flashlight inside. The other knelt near the fuel tanks. Their movements were precise, coordinated, deliberate. My pulse jumped. "Friends of yours?" I asked, trying casual. She didn't look up. "I don't know what you mean." I grabbed my bowl. "Actually, I need to use that outhouse first." She finally looked at me. Something in her eyes shifted, calculating, deciding. "Might want to eat while it's hot," she said. I didn't wait. I shoved the door open and rushed toward my truck, mag flashlight in hand. The men had moved, 3 more emerging from behind the trailers, all eyes on me. My exit, blocked by an old pickup parked sideways across the narrow road. Heart hammering, I kept walking, trying to seem calm. One man moved toward me, not running, pacing. I measured my options. Running might seal my fate. Instead, I quickened my pace to the cab, yanking the door open and hauling myself inside, slamming it shut. He grabbed the handle, calm, rhythmic. I caught a full look, mid-40s, dark beard, dead eyes. Engine roared to life. I released the brakes, threw it in gear. The pickup in front was old, maybe 1980s Ford. My rig, fully loaded, weighed over 35,000 pounds. That truck, maybe 4,000. I gunned the engine, aiming straight. The man leapt aside. Others scattered. The pickup crumpled under my tires with a violent crunch. My seatbelt cut across my chest as the cab shuddered, but I didn't stop. 20 minutes later, I was back on the main highway, adrenaline making my vision blur. I pulled into the first legitimate truck stop. Bright lights, activity everywhere. Shaking, I called 911. Idaho State Police took my report. They later confirmed. The building was abandoned, the truck's gone, gravel swept clean, the sign torn down. Investigation linked my encounter to a series of disappearances of independent drivers along that stretch. Cargo and cash lured by fake rest stops. Arrests followed. Mugshots revealed the same dead-eyed man. Now, every route I drive, every truck stop I approach, I trust my instincts. Fuel always above half, phone charged, and never ever pulling into an unmarked rest area. That night could have ended differently. My decision to drive through that barricade saved me. Comfort, routine, and a friendly-looking sign can kill. The solitude was exactly what I needed. After defending my master's thesis on Appalachian black bear migration patterns last May, I'd been bouncing between a friend's small studio in Seattle and my parents' house in Spokane, endlessly sending out applications for research positions. My life felt paused in a loop of waiting. When the U.S. Forest Service posted a short-term field assignment at the Black Pine Ridge Monitoring Station, I didn't hesitate. It was a week-long data collection job in the northern Cascades, paying barely enough for gas and food, but it offered something I desperately craved: time alone in the mountains. I loaded my old Subaru on a Wednesday afternoon, the early summer sun warm against my back, and drove 6 hours northeast. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sky was beginning to burn gold along the horizon. The parking lot was deserted, except for a rusted Chevy pickup that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. My pack was heavy with sample jars, field notebooks, a GPS unit, a week's worth of freeze-dried meals, and more camera gear than I probably needed. But the thought of 7 days entirely disconnected from the world made it all worth it. The hike up the ridge was steep, every switchback revealing a panorama of thick conifers and jagged peaks veiled in early morning mist. By late afternoon, I reached the station, a modest wooden cabin about 12 by 12 feet, with a corrugated metal roof that gleamed faintly in the fading light. Solar panels clung precariously to the south wall, and a rickety tower held a small satellite dish. Inside, there was a cot with a slightly musty sleeping bag, a propane stove, a folding table, and a lockbox containing field equipment. The Forest Service manual had warned me about the satellite phone. It only worked in the clearing if held at a precise angle, but it was supposed to be reliable enough for daily check-ins. That first evening, I wandered through the sampling sites, scraping lichen from granite and logging coordinates. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, sharp and sweet. The sunset painted the ridge in strokes of orange and purple, a scene I could never capture with my camera. By nightfall, I slept deeper than I had in months. It was a dreamless sleep, heavy and restorative, the kind only wilderness can provide. Thursday and Friday passed in a comforting rhythm. Oatmeal and instant coffee at dawn. Hours spent crouched over rocks with my GPS and collection kit. Then evenings updating logs and photographing samples. The weather was perfect. Clear skies and cool temperatures in the mid-70s during the day, dropping to the 40s at night. For the first time in months, my mind felt uncluttered, focused only on the meticulous work before me. I even started to enjoy the isolation, the quiet company of the mountains. But by Saturday, the first signs of trouble appeared. Clouds began rolling in from the west, dark and thick, carrying a chill that bit through my jacket. By mid-morning, the wind had picked up, rustling the pines with a hollow, almost whispering sound. The first raindrops were fat and cold. I packed up quickly and returned to the cabin with my sample jars. The storm hit fully by 2 p.m. Sheets of rain pounding the roof, lightning flashing across the distant peaks, thunder rolling through the valley. I wasn't worried at first. The cabin seemed sturdy, and I'd weathered storms before. Then I heard it. A metal screech, followed by a sharp crash. Heart hammering, I crept to the door and peeked outside. The satellite tower had snapped about halfway up, the dish spinning in the wind like a pendulum. Solar panels were cracked and bent. I grabbed the satellite phone, holding it at every angle in the clearing. Nothing. Dead air. No signal. Panic began to creep in. I tried to calm myself. I had food, water from the nearby creek, propane for cooking, a headlamp, and a battery backup that still showed half charge. But as night approached, the storm's intensity seemed to amplify every sound: the rain, the wind, and something else. Something deliberate. Around 11 p.m., when the storm briefly abated, I heard it. Footsteps on soft mud. Deliberate. Heavy. Uneven. My breath caught. The sound came from the edge of the clearing, circling the cabin. I froze, every instinct screaming at me not to move. The steps paused, then continued, scraping and thudding against the wooden boards. It was methodical, like someone was testing the structure, checking for weaknesses. Then came a pause, long enough that I thought I might have imagined it. But then, a wet, ragged breathing sound hit me from the darkness. Close, suffocating, deliberate. Something had been right outside the cabin while I slept. My hands shook as I gripped my knife, bear spray and whistle, each object suddenly feeling both trivial and vital. By dawn, the rain had subsided, leaving a thick fog clinging to the ridges. I found evidence of the intruder, a single work glove, placed deliberately on a flat rock near the cabin door, and boot prints larger than mine, circling the structure as if marking territory, then disappearing back toward the logging road. Whoever it was had stood there, watching me pack, but left without further contact. I knew I couldn't stay. Waiting for rescue meant giving them opportunities to return. The storm had left the trail treacherous, but I had no choice. I set off at first light, hiking 23 miles over narrow ridges and swollen creeks, my legs screaming, feet blistered, adrenaline propelling me forward. Every shadow made me jump, every crack of a branch set my pulse racing. By late afternoon, I reached the trailhead, the Subaru gleaming in the golden sun, and drove straight to the ranger station. Vincent, the Forest Service ranger, listened carefully as I recounted everything. The footsteps, the glove, the boot prints. They sent patrols, checked the cabin, and investigated the logging road. Nothing conclusive was found. Tire tracks, yes, but nothing identifying. No one knew who it was or what they wanted. In the weeks that followed, I avoided solo assignments in isolated locations. The memory of Black Pine Ridge lingered in every quiet forest, every empty trail, a reminder that solitude is not always peaceful. Some threats are invisible, patient, and deliberate. And some experiences, once lived, forever change your sense of safety. I had been looking forward to the solitude for months. After defending my master's thesis on alpine wildlife populations in May, I had been bouncing between my cramped apartment in Portland and my sister's tiny studio, endlessly submitting PhD applications while feeling like my life was stuck in neutral. When the U.S. Forest Service posted a short-term field assignment at the Cascade Ridge Monitoring Station, I didn't hesitate. 7 days alone in the mountains for data collection sounded like heaven compared to the constant noise and distractions of city life. I loaded my Subaru the night before, cramming in freeze-dried meals, field gear, camera equipment, and enough clothing for every possible weather scenario. The drive northeast took about 6 hours, winding past evergreen forests and sleepy towns, until I finally reached the trailhead parking lot. It was nearly empty except for a rusted pickup truck that looked like it had been abandoned since the 1990s. The mountains loomed overhead, jagged and silent, promising both peace and isolation. The hike up was long, exhausting, and beautiful. My pack dug into my shoulders, but the views made it worth every ache. By late Thursday afternoon, I reached the small clearing where the station sat, at about 7,200 feet above sea level. The station wasn't much, a 12 by 12 plywood cabin with a corrugated metal roof, solar panels on the south side, and a rickety satellite dish tower balanced precariously on 2x4 supports. Inside, there was a military surplus cot with a musty sleeping bag, a propane camping stove, a folding table, and a lockbox containing the research equipment. A battery backup system, supposedly charged by the solar panels, provided just enough power to keep my headlamp and satellite phone functional. The first evening passed in a tranquil rhythm. I logged GPS coordinates, scraped alpine moss for samples, and photographed the surrounding ridgeline as the sun set. The stars were spectacular, thick and bright in a sky untouched by city light. That night, I slept harder than I had in months, the kind of unconscious, dreamless sleep that only comes when you are completely isolated, and the nearest person is miles away. Friday and Saturday were methodical. Up at dawn, oatmeal and instant coffee, then out to the sampling sites. Hours passed crouched on jagged rocks, scraping moss and recording notes. The weather was ideal. Clear skies during the day, crisp temperatures dropping to the 40s at night. I checked in with the ranger station twice a day, holding the satellite phone high in the clearing like some kind of ritual offering. Vincent, the ranger, always answered with bored friendliness, asking routine questions about weather and wildlife. Everything was mundane and perfectly normal. Saturday evening, I allowed myself a small indulgence, heating extra water for a proper wash. I stripped down inside the cabin and wiped myself clean with a bandana, feeling almost human again. Dinner was a freeze-dried beef stroganoff, and I watched the stars gradually spread across the black sky. Peace, it seemed, was mine. Sunday morning brought a change. Clouds began rolling in from the west, dark and fast-moving. The wind picked up, rattling the cabin and causing the small solar panels to vibrate. By noon, fat, cold raindrops began to fall, and I hustled back inside the cabin. Around 2 p.m., the storm hit with full force. Rain pounding the metal roof, thunder shaking the structure, and wind threatening to bend the satellite dish tower entirely off its supports. I barely had time to notice the dish dangling at a terrifying angle before it struck me. The satellite phone showed no signal, no dial tone, just dead air. I tried to remain rational. The storm would pass by morning, and Vincent would notice my missed check-in and send someone. I had enough food and water for the rest of the week. I set up a small workspace inside, arranging my bear spray, knife, whistle, and emergency flare on the table, almost as talismans. Sleep that night was fitful, broken, plagued by imagined footsteps outside. Monday came with an uneasy calm. The storm had subsided, but the mountains were quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Gray light filtered into the cabin, and the forest was eerily still. My mind kept returning to the logistics. The trail down was muddy and treacherous, possibly washed out in places. If something happened, nobody would know until Tuesday or Wednesday. I rationed my remaining freeze-dried meals, boiled creek water, and tried the satellite phone again. Still nothing. Around midnight, the impossible happened. I was dozing in a half-conscious state when I heard a distant engine, grinding up the old logging road that led to the ridge. My pulse shot through the roof. The Forest Service manual said the road was impassable without a high-clearance vehicle. Someone was driving it anyway. The engine grew closer, then abruptly stopped about a quarter mile away. Silence followed. My instincts screamed to stay put. I didn't move until dawn. When I finally opened my eyes, the cabin door was cracked open by about 6 inches. I had locked it before bed. My stomach dropped. Outside, there was a single brown canvas work glove, deliberately placed on a boulder. I followed boot prints pressed into the soft mud around the clearing. They circled the cabin, approached the door, and returned to the tree line. Someone had been watching me while I slept, methodical, confident, and careful. I spent the next day in hyper-vigilant terror, scanning the woods constantly. Every branch snap, Every bird call, every gust of wind set my heart racing. The satellite phone remained useless, the solar panels insufficient. I realized that staying meant giving whoever this was more opportunities. At First Light Wednesday, I packed my gear and hit the trail with grim determination. The path was treacherous after the storm. Mud clung to my boots, roots threatened to trip me, and swollen streams forced careful crossings. Every shadow seemed alive, every movement in the underbrush a potential threat. I kept glancing behind, half expecting to see someone following. By the time I reached the trailhead, 13 hours later, I was completely exhausted, feet blistered, and every muscle screaming. The Subaru was exactly where I had left it. I drove straight to the ranger station, barely able to explain what had happened. Vincent and his supervisor took it seriously. They found the glove I had left on the table inside the cabin and documented the boot prints, though rain had erased most details. Patrols were increased and trail cameras set up, but ultimately, the perpetrator was never identified. I never returned to that ridge. Solo fieldwork in remote areas became a thing of the past for me. The solitude that I once craved now carries a different meaning. Being alone isn't always peaceful. Sometimes, it just makes you an easier target. January in northern Idaho means one thing for line inspectors: overtime and frostbite. I'd been driving those backcountry service roads for the Clearwater Power Company for nearly 11 years, checking transmission lines after blizzards, fallen trees, and wind damage. Honestly, I thought I'd seen everything the mountains could throw at a man. Old Tom Riley, my supervisor, used to joke that I could drive from Elk River to the Montana border blindfolded and still hit every pothole perfectly. That particular Thursday started like any other storm call morning. Just me, a thermos of burnt gas station coffee, and the company of 250 groaning its way up toward Elk Ridge Pass. The Weather Service had warned of 70-mile-per-hour gusts overnight, and Tom wanted me to check Line 62, a remote section that ran through the Bitterroot foothills, where cell service went to die. No one else wanted the route because it meant 4 hours of snow-choked road and zero backup. But solitude never bothered me. After the divorce, those endless white roads felt like the only place I could still breathe. What still chills me, even now, is how many locals tried to warn me that day without ever saying the words. When I stopped for gas at a small Sinclair on Route 12, the cashier, kid couldn't have been more than 20, asked me which route I was taking. When I mentioned Elk Ridge Pass, his smile faded like I'd just cursed in church. He started to say something, stopped, then simply muttered, "You might want to top off your thermos and take an extra blanket, sir." Even the woman at dispatch, Nancy, sounded uneasy when I radioed in my route. She kept suggesting I wait until Friday, when the plows had cleared the pass properly. But there was another snow system rolling in, and if the lines came down, 3 counties could lose power. So I told her I'd be careful, clicked the mic off, and drove straight into the teeth of the storm. By mid-afternoon, the wind was howling like something alive. Snow was whipping across the windshield so thick, I had to lean forward just to see the yellow reflectors on the side posts. The F-250's thermometer blinked minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and the heater could barely keep up. I just passed the old Forest Service marker that read Mile 21 when I saw what looked like a fallen tree limb across the road. Standard procedure said to radio it in before leaving the vehicle, but my comms were already spitting nothing but static. I figured I'd move it myself, report back. Once I cleared the bend, I stopped the truck, threw it in park, reached for my gloves, and that's when the steering wheel jerked hard to the left, like something had yanked it. The whole truck started sliding sideways towards the drop-off. There's a special kind of helplessness when 7,000 pounds of steel decides it wants to dance on black ice. I remember pumping the brakes, useless, while the passenger side tilted down toward the ravine. The truck slammed into a snowbank, flipped halfway, and landed nose first against a cluster of fir trees, maybe 20 feet below the road. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I felt a white-hot snap in my left leg. When I looked down, my ankle was bent in a way ankles shouldn't be. The engine sputtered, then died. The silence that followed was deafening, just the ticking of the cooling metal and the distant wail of wind through the pines. My first clear thought: find the emergency beacon. We'd been issued GPS distress beacons after a lineman froze to death 2 winters ago. It took me 15 excruciating minutes to pull it from my vest pocket and switch it on. A weak green light blinked twice, then flickered to red. Signal unstable. I dragged myself halfway out of the cab to assess the damage, using the door for leverage. The snow was falling heavy, almost sideways now. And that's when I noticed something that froze my blood colder than the air ever could. There were footprints in the fresh snow, circling my truck. Not animal tracks, human boot prints. Same tread pattern as mine, same size. But I hadn't gotten out of the truck before the crash. They circled once around the wreck, stopped right near the passenger door, then disappeared back up toward the road. The snow hadn't filled them in yet. They were maybe 30 minutes old at most. I tried to tell myself someone had stopped to check, maybe even tried to help before the storm worsened, but that didn't explain why they hadn't come down to the truck, or why there was a faint trail of cigarette butts pressed into the snow near the road. 5 of them. Marlboro Golds. Still warm enough that they'd melted tiny holes in the crusted snow before freezing again. I don't smoke. Nobody at the company does anymore. It's against policy in the vehicle someone had been there. Watching. The storm worsened as night swallowed the mountains. By 5 p.m., visibility dropped to 0. I bundled myself in the emergency blanket and huddled inside the cab, ankle throbbing, the beacon still flashing weakly every 30 seconds. Then came the crunching sound. Footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate steps, pacing back and forth along the edge of the road. I flicked on my flashlight and pointed it upward through the shattered windshield. A figure stood silhouetted against the snow. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy parka and fur-lined hood. He just stood there, motionless, hands deep in his pockets, head tilted slightly like he was studying an insect under glass. I started shouting, waving the flashlight, begging for help. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even flinch. After maybe a minute, he turned and walked back into the blizzard, his shape fading into white. I don't know how long I sat there, shaking from fear, cold, or both. But I know this: he wasn't alone. Sometime past midnight, more footsteps returned. 2, maybe 3 sets. They whispered above me, voices muffled by the storm, but close enough that I could hear laughter. Low, deliberate, playful. Once something hit the roof. A rock, then a branch, then another. It wasn't random. It was teasing. Then silence. Utter, perfect silence. Until the faint squeal of metal. Someone was trying the passenger door handle. The locks had engaged automatically when the truck lost power. Thank God for that. The handle jiggled once, then again, then stopped. I held my breath. The next sound was a whisper. Not words, just air moving where air shouldn't move. Then came it, the sound that will haunt me forever. Fingernails dragging slowly across glass. Long, deliberate strokes from top to bottom. Not scratching, not clawing. Petting. It went on for maybe half a minute, then stopped. Then a single knock on the window. Gentle. I could smell cigarette smoke seeping through the cracks. Sweet. Stale. Unmistakable. I don't remember when I started crying, but when I did, it wasn't from pain. It was because I finally understood that whoever these people were. They weren't there to help. I must have blacked out sometime before dawn. The next thing I remember was a faint engine rumble above me. Different from before. Louder. Real. I grabbed one of the flares, cracked it open, and tossed it toward the road. The flare painted the world red, and that's when I saw the tracks clearly for the first time. Not 2, not 3. At least 6 distinct sets of boot prints surrounded the wreck, crossing and circling, some dragging marks through the snow and near the tree line, about 30 yards away. Something darker, half buried under ice. A torn jacket sleeve, frozen stiff, sleeve still filled with an arm. Then I heard shouting, not English, but something Slavic. 2 men climbed down the slope carrying hunting rifles and flashlights. They found me half conscious, still clutching the beacon. Their names were Yuri and Pavel, brothers from a logging crew out of Pierce. They weren't surprised by what they saw. When they pulled me free, Yuri kept glancing at the cigarette butts and cut toe strap near the road. He didn't say much, just muttered something in Russian that I didn't understand. Later, he translated. They were here again, the ones who wait. I spent 3 days in a hospital bed in Lewiston. My ankle was shattered in 3 places. The sheriff's department took my statement, politely then dismissively. They said the toe strap had probably snapped during the crash. Said the cigarette butts could have been from passing hunters. Said my fatigue and exposure might have caused hallucinations. A week later, Yuri called me. Said another vehicle had been found on that same stretch. A Jeep Cherokee driven by a college geologist heading to a field site. The toe strap? Cut clean through the driver? Never found. Locals, Yuri said, have a name for them. The ones who wait. Nobody knows how many there are or where they go when the snow melts. They just know not to drive Elk Ridge Pass after dark, and never alone. He told me something else before hanging up. When the snow's deep enough, sound travels different. You'll hear them breathing before you see their footprints. It's been 2 years I live in Boise now, working logistics from a desk like a normal person. But sometimes, when the wind kicks up and the snow taps against my window, I swear I can hear that same dragging sound. Nails across glass, I still check the Idaho news every winter. There are always 1 or 2 missing person reports along Route 12 or near Elk Ridge Pass. Always blamed on weather. Always in bad storms. Always unsolved. The articles never mention the footprints, or the cigarette smoke, or the cut toe straps. But I know the truth. So if you ever find yourself in the northern Rockies, and a local tells you not to take the pass, listen to them. Take the long way. Because some people don't just hunt elk or deer up there. They hunt opportunity, and they're still waiting. It's funny how people always warn you about driving through the Appalachian backroads after dark, like there's something waiting out there in the fog, between the trees. But after a dozen uneventful trips, you stop believing the stories. You start thinking they're just old truck stop myths, told to scare city folks who don't know any better. I was one of those people. Or at least, I used to be. I'd been running sales routes for a medical supply company since 2012, usually between Charlotte and Columbus. The drives were long but quiet, and I liked them that way. No distractions, no city traffic. Just me, my Ford Explorer, and the hum of asphalt winding through the mountains. That October, the weather had started to turn early. The kind of cold that sneaks in after sundown and bites through your clothes. I'd just wrapped up a successful week and was heading home to North Carolina. My daughter, Lily, was turning 3 the next morning. I'd promised her I'd be there when she woke up, and I wasn't about to break that promise for a night in some roadside motel. The clock on the dash said 11:27 when it happened. A loud crack, like a gunshot, then a violent pull to the right. The Explorer lurched as the front tire shredded apart, flapping like torn paper. My heart jumped into my throat. I fought the steering wheel, gravel crunching under the tires, until I managed to ease onto a narrow shoulder just before a sharp bend. When the car stopped, the silence felt heavier than the mountain itself. No other headlights in sight, no signal bars on my phone. Just the soft blinking of my hazard lights, washing the rocky cliff face beside me in slow orange pulses. I stepped out, my breath fogging the air. The cold smelled like pine and wet stone. I grabbed the jack and the spare from the trunk, trying to stay calm, pretending this was just another flat tire, a minor inconvenience, nothing more. That's when I heard it. The low growl of an engine echoing faintly down the two-lane road. It wasn't a normal car sound, deeper, throatier, with that uneven diesel rattle you hear from older pickup trucks. It came closer, growing louder until the headlights rounded the bend behind me. For a moment, I felt relieved. Maybe someone would stop. Maybe I'd get lucky. The truck slowed, but instead of pulling up beside me, it stopped about 30 feet back. Then the headlights clicked off. Instant darkness. No engine noise, no radio, nothing. Just my hazard lights blinking across two dark figures now stepping out of the truck. Both doors shut softly, too softly. The kind of quiet that feels intentional. Two men. One tall and wiry, wearing what looked like an old baseball cap. The other shorter, thicker through the shoulders, moving like a man who'd spent his life doing hard labor. Neither of them said a word. They just started walking toward me in rhythm with the blinking of my hazard lights. One step, pause. One step. I straightened up, trying to look calm even though every instinct screamed at me to get back in the car and lock the doors. "Evening," I called out. My voice cracked slightly. "Got a flat. Should be good in a few minutes." The tall one tilted his head. The shorter one chuckled. A small, dry sound that didn't match any kind of humor I recognized. They kept walking. When the tall one came close enough for me to see his face, the light caught something in his hand. A crowbar, gripped low against his leg. That was the moment the situation shifted. I wasn't looking at good Samaritans. I was looking at predators. "Nice car," the tall one said, his voice slow and syrupy. The kind of southern drawl that could sound friendly, if not for the way he was smiling. "You must do pretty well for yourself." I didn't answer. My mind was running through every possible escape. Behind me was a cliff drop, easily 100 feet. Ahead was nothing but mountain road. My only hope was to stall, maybe get inside the car before they boxed me in. The short one glanced at my wrist. "That a Rolex?" "It's just a Seiko," I said quickly. "Not worth much," he grinned. "We'll be the judge of that." They split up, one circling toward the driver's side, the other drifting behind the Explorer. My pulse was pounding so hard, it drowned out everything else. I had the tire iron in my hand, still slick with oil from the lug nuts. It felt small and useless compared to the crowbar the tall one carried, but it was something. "Wallet, keys, phone," he said flatly. "Put 'em on the hood." "Take what you want," I said. Just let me go." The short one's tone darkened. "See, that's the problem. Folks like you, they go running their mouths afterward. Report stolen cars. Call the cops. Then we got trouble." He pulled something from his pocket, a folding knife. The blade snapped open with a metallic click that echoed off the rock face. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I could smell cigarette smoke and something chemical. Gasoline, maybe, coming off his jacket. That smell would stick with me for months afterward. They stepped closer. The crowbar gleamed. My mind screamed run, but my body was locked in place. Then the tall one said something that froze me to the bone. "You got kids?" He'd noticed the car seat in the back. My stomach turned. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't just robbery. When he raised the crowbar, my body moved before my mind did. I swung the tire iron as hard as I could. It connected under his chin with a dull crack. He went down hard, the crowbar clattering across the pavement. The shorter one lunged with the knife. I felt the blade slice across my forearm. Hot, sharp pain flashing through the cold night. I shoved forward, hitting him square in the chest. We went down together, gravel grinding into my back. He was strong, stronger than I expected. We fought for control of the knife. I could hear him grunting, smell his breath, sour and bitter. My fingers slipped, and he almost got the blade free before I managed to knee him in the gut and swing again. The tire iron smashed into his wrist. The knife went flying. I scrambled up, blood dripping down my sleeve. The tall one was already staggering to his feet, blood pouring from his mouth. He looked feral, half human, half nightmare, when he lunged for me. I didn't think. I just ran. I dove into the Explorer, slammed the door, and hit the locks a split second before he crashed against the window, leaving a crimson smear across the glass. The engine roared to life. One tire was gone, the rim screeching against asphalt. But I didn't care. The truck behind me flickered to life again. One headlight broken, engine growling like some wounded animal. They were coming. I slammed the gear shift into reverse and floored it. Metal crunched. Their grille caved in as my Explorer rammed backward. The impact threw sparks and glass into the night. Then I shifted to drive and sped forward, the wheel shaking, the car fishtailing as I pushed it far past what the rim could handle. In the rearview mirror, their truck swerved, struggling to keep up. One headlight bobbed in and out of the darkness. I prayed out loud, something I hadn't done in years. After what felt like forever, I saw lights ahead, bright, fluorescent, human a gas station, 2 semis idling out front, and a state trooper standing at the pump. I all but crashed into the lot, horn blaring, arm bleeding through my sleeve. The officer had his hand on his gun until he saw the look on my face. Pure panic, and the blood on the door. Within minutes, backup arrived. They caught the 2 men less than an hour later, trying to take a forest road around the highway patrol block. Turns out, they weren't new to this. The sheriff told me they'd been hitting that stretch of Route 19 for nearly 2 years, picking off travelers unlucky enough to break down after dark. 12 wallets, 6 phones, 3 missing persons cases, 2 bodies found in a ravine not half a mile from where my tire blew. The tall one, known was Roy Benner, had to have his jaw reconstructed. His cousin, Dale, turned on him for a lighter sentence and told the police everything, where they'd dumped the cars, how they'd picked targets, even how they'd scattered old nails along certain bends to cause blowouts. It wasn't luck that my tire had burst that night. They'd made it happen. I made it to Lily's birthday party the next morning. My arm was in a sling, 20 stitches pulling every time I moved. But I was there when she woke up, just like I promised. When she asked why Daddy had a boo-boo, I told her I'd had a little accident but was all better now. But I wasn't. Not really. Some nights, I still wake up hearing that diesel growl behind me, echoing off invisible mountains, headlights fading in and out of the dark. I traded the Explorer months later, but I kept the tire iron, still dented, still stained. It hangs in my garage now. A reminder that sometimes the only thing standing between you and the darkness is how far you're willing to fight your way back into the light. The mountains never liked being crossed after dark. Locals in Silver Vale said the range had its own moods, quick to change and slow to forgive. But I didn't listen. I was 27, driving home from a forestry seminar in Colorado Springs, cutting through what my GPS called Whisper Pass Road. The map showed it as a shortcut through the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, 40 miles of switchbacks and forgotten mining trails that promised a scenic route to the interstate. It was early November, the season when the snow comes before anyone's ready for it. The clouds had been gathering all afternoon, pressing low, the color of bruised iron. By the time the first flakes started falling, I was already too far in to turn back. The radio fizzed out, and the cell signal blinked to a single bar before vanishing altogether. The air grew thin and sharp, fog curling between the pines like smoke. My Subaru's heater whined against the cold, the windshield wipers clawing at a storm that had gone from gentle to furious in minutes. When the engine sputtered, coughed, and died halfway around a blind curve, I thought I'd just flooded it. But the key turned uselessly. The dash lights flickered once and went dark. Silence, except for the sound of snow pelting metal. I sat there, breath fogging the glass, feeling that deep mountain quiet, the kind that makes you aware of your heartbeat. Steam began to curl from under the hood, white against the falling snow. Then, through the blur of white, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. They moved slow, deliberate, before stopping a few feet behind me. A truck, an old red Chevy with the county seal faded on its side. The driver stepped out into the storm. He wore a canvas jacket and wool cap pulled low, face lined from years of weather. When he reached my window, I cracked it just enough to hear him over the wind. "You all right there, son?" His voice had a calmness that cut through the noise, steady like someone used to handling frightened animals. I told him the car had died, and I couldn't get a signal. He nodded, looked back down the road. "These passes eat cars every winter. Name's Earl Mason. County maintenance been patrolling these roads 30 years. He smiled faintly. "Lucky I came by when I did." He helped me push the Subaru further off the shoulder, then tied a strip of reflective orange cloth to my antenna, so the plow crews don't turn your car into scrap when the snow really starts coming down. He offered me a ride to a nearby town called Hollow Creek. About 15 minutes down the valley, I hesitated. Everything in me said to wait with the car, but the wind was howling, and the temperature gauge was already dropping below freezing. So I got in. Earl drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the whiteout ahead. The inside of his truck smelled faintly of oil and old leather. He talked as we went, about how this road used to be a mining route, how his father and grandfather had worked the copper veins around Whisper Ridge until the mines closed. He said Hollow Creek was small, maybe a dozen buildings, and a diner that hadn't changed since the 70s. When we finally reached it, the storm had turned biblical. Snow came sideways, swallowing the few streetlights that still worked. Earl parked right in front of the diner, engine idling. "Best coffee this side of the divide," he said, opening his door. "Get yourself warm. I'll swing back later. Make sure your car hasn't been buried." I thanked him, reached for my wallet, but he waved me off. By the time I stepped inside, he was already gone, tail lights fading into the white curtain of the storm. The diner smelled of stale grease and wood smoke. A single fluorescent tube hummed overhead, making the chrome counter shimmer faintly. Behind it stood a woman in her late 60s, with a name tag that read, Ruth. Her gray hair was tied back, her apron dusted with flour. "Storm's bad tonight," she said, eyes flicking toward the door behind me. I told her about my car. About Earl giving me a ride down the sound she made wasn't quite a word. More like a small gasp she tried to swallow. "You said Earl Mason?" I nodded. She went quiet for a long time, then leaned on the counter, face pale under the harsh light. "Son, Earl Mason's been dead for 22 years. Avalanche took him and a road worker up near Hollow Creek Gorge in 2003. I laughed, half thinking she was joking, but her expression didn't change. "He was a good man," she said softly. "Used to help stranded drivers, same as you described. Folks still tell stories about seeing his truck during storms. But that truck was buried with him." The diner door rattled under the wind. The fluorescent light flickered once, twice. Outside, the snow thickened to the point where the glass looked frosted from the inside. Ruth turned off the open sign. "Come on. Basement's higher ground. Flood watch in effect. This valley fills like a bowl when it rains this hard." We spent hours down there, listening to the building creak. A battery radio sputtered out weather warnings. Road closures, flash floods, landslides. The concrete floor grew wet around our boots. Each time lightning flashed through the narrow window, I caught Ruth watching me, her eyes full of a mix of fear and calculation. Near midnight, the storm began to ease. She asked me again, "You're sure he said his name was Earl Mason?" I said yes. She went to a metal cabinet, pulled out an old photo album wrapped in plastic. The pages were warped and yellowed. On one page, she pointed to a picture of a man standing beside a county maintenance truck. The same red Chevy. The same calm eyes. "That's him," I whispered. The caption beneath read, "Earl Mason, maintenance foreman, missing since December 2003. I stared at the photo so long that the edges of the room seemed to fade away. Morning came in a dull gray wash. Rescue crews arrived in military Humvees, their tires grinding over frozen slush. They told me the pass was closed indefinitely. A landslide had buried 2 miles of road, including the stretch where my Subaru had broken down. One of them, a deputy, asked for my name, then paused. "Your car's been found," he said, "half a mile downstream, crushed under rock and ice. Looks like it rolled off sometime before the flood hit." I stared at him, confused. "That's impossible. I left it parked and flagged." He held up a hand. "The tow logs show the flag, yeah. But the tracks, they show someone drove it off the shoulder after the storm started." He showed me a grainy printout from a dash-mounted camera on one of their snowplows. My Subaru rolling slowly downhill. Lights off. A dark figure behind the wheel. The timestamp read 9:12 p.m. That was during the hours I'd been in the diner basement with Ruth. The deputy asked me a dozen questions. Where had Earl dropped me off? Did I notice anything strange? The more I tried to remember, the less clear it became. I could recall the hum of the truck engine, the rhythm of the windshield wipers, Earl's voice telling stories about his family, but I couldn't remember stepping out of the truck. Couldn't remember the sound of the door closing behind me. They kept me in town 2 days while crews cleared the debris. Every night I dreamt of headlights cutting through snow, of a man's voice saying, "Lucky I came by when I did." On the 3rd morning, the sheriff himself came to see me at the small lodge where I was staying. He was a broad man, with eyes too tired for his age. He carried a small evidence bag. "We found this wedged near your car," he said, placing it on the table. Inside was a rusted brass key, the number 112 etched faintly on it. "Belongs to a locker in the old county depot," he explained. "That place has been sealed for years. Figured maybe you'd like to see it, since your story and Mason's line up in some strange ways." Curiosity overrode fear. That afternoon, I followed the sheriff's directions to the depot. A long, single-story building half collapsed under snow and neglect. Inside, the air was cold and metallic, filled with the smell of wet rust. Locker 112 sat at the end of the hall, door swollen with moisture. The key turned stiffly, but worked. Inside, wrapped in oil-stained canvas, was a leather notebook. The first pages were inspection logs, road maintenance notes from 2003. But halfway through, the handwriting changed. Shaky, uneven, written in pencil instead of ink. The mountain keeps what it wants. She asked me for a ride to town, said her car broke down at the gorge. I drove her down. But when the rain started, I saw the faces in the mirror. Not hers, not mine. The next lines were smeared, water damaged, but one sentence stood out clear and deliberate, written in darker graphite. When the storm comes, the road remembers every traveler it's ever taken. My hand shook as I turned the page. The final entry was dated December 2nd, 2003, the night Earl vanished. It read, "I can hear the engines again. Someone's out there in the snow. Maybe I can help this time. Maybe that's what it wants." I closed the notebook and left it where I found it. Outside, the clouds were already gathering again, gray and swollen. The wind carried the faintest sound, like tires crunching through snow somewhere just out of sight. On instinct, I turned back toward the depot and caught a glimpse through the cracked window, a pair of headlights crawling up the pass road. And for the briefest second, I thought I saw the outline of a red Chevy. I didn't stop driving until I hit the interstate. Didn't turn on the radio, didn't check the mirrors. Back home, I tried to tell the story to a friend once, left out the part about Earl, about the truck, about the notebook. But even stripped bare, it sounded like a ghost story. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe I was lucky, like he said. Or maybe, when the mountains decide you don't belong there, they send one of their own to make sure you leave. And if you ever find yourself stranded on Whisper Pass Road in a storm, and an old red Chevy pulls up behind you, just remember, not every helping hand is still alive.